The email arrived late on a Tuesday. The subject line was innocent enough. Checking in. It was from Sarah, an old college friend I hadn't spoken to in years. My thumb hovered over it, curiosity a faint spark in the usual routine of junk mail and work correspondence. I opened it. Her words were careful, almost hesitant, wrapped in layers of concern and awkwardness. She'd been in Oakhaven, our little coastal town, staying with family. She'd driven past the beach house. Our beach house. And she'd seen him. Not just him. Him. And a woman she didn't recognize, laughing on the porch, silhouetted against the sunset, looking entirely too comfortable, too right, in the place that was ours. The place that was mine. The spark of curiosity died, replaced by a cold, spreading numbness that originated in my chest and radiated outwards, chilling my fingers, blurring my vision. Oakhaven was our sanctuary. The house wasn't just bricks and wood. It was built on years of shared dreams, whispered promises under starry skies, the laughter of hypothetical children we'd raise there one day. It was the physical manifestation of our future, a future he was apparently already living with someone else. The details in her email were sparse, but devastating. The way they leaned against the railing, the easy intimacy of their posture, the way she ran a hand through his hair. Little things that screamed ownership, a casual claim on a life that wasn't hers to touch. Sarah ended by saying she hated to be the one to tell me that maybe she was mistaken, but her tone, the detailed specifics, confirmed she wasn't. The numbness began to recede, replaced by a sharp, icy point of pure disbelief, then a slow, hot burn of outrage. He wouldn't. He couldn't. Not in our place. The place we'd poured everything into. My sanctuary. Our sanctuary. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Normal life before the email felt like a different dimension. It was solid, predictable, built on the quiet rhythm of a long marriage. John and I had been together for 15 years, married for 10. We were the couple everyone envied, stable, supportive, building a life brick by patient brick. The beach house in Oakhaven was the capstone of that life, the dream we'd worked towards for a decade. It wasn't a spontaneous purchase. It was meticulously planned, saved for, pored over design magazines late at night. Every nail, every coat of paint, every piece of furniture held a memory, a shared decision, a piece of our history. We'd spent countless weekends there, escaping the city, walking the beach, reading side by side, talking about everything and nothing. It was where I felt most myself, most us. John was steady, reliable, a little quiet sometimes, absorbed in his work, but always there. Or so I thought. Our life was a comfortable, well-worn path, leading straight to a future I saw clearly, retirement by the coast, watching sunsets from that same porch, growing old together in our Oakhaven haven. I never saw the cliff edge just around the bend. I never smelled the smoke until the fire was already roaring. I trusted him implicitly. He was my anchor, my best friend, the man I believed would navigate every storm with me, not push me overboard. The beach house was meant to be our forever place. It was the symbol of our commitment, the quiet promise of decades to come. It wasn't just a house, it was the physical embodiment of our love story. Or the story I thought we had. I remembered painting the trim on the porch, sunlight warm on my back, John inside assembling furniture, the air filled with sawdust and possibility. I remembered finding the perfect, slightly weathered armchair at an antique shop upstate, stuffing it into the back of his car, driving back to Oakhaven singing along to old songs, already picturing it in the living room, overlooking the dunes. These weren't just memories. They were the foundation stones of my reality. Each one felt like a tiny, perfectly cut gem, placed with care. Now, they felt like shards of glass, glittering mockingly under the pale, cold light of Sarah's email. How many times had he been there with her? How many times had they walked the beach we walked, slept in the bed we slept in, brewed coffee in the kitchen I designed? The thought was a physical blow. It stole the air from my lungs. My carefully constructed world, built on shared history and absolute trust, was crumbling before my eyes. The silence in my own house, the one I was currently sitting in, felt deafening. It was filled with the ghosts of a future I no longer had, replaced by the horrifying image of her feet on my floorboards, her hands touching our things. The betrayal wasn't just in the affair, it was in the desecration of our sanctuary, the casual cruelty of claiming the one place that felt most sacred to us. He had taken the symbol of our life together and twisted it into a monument to his deceit. My hands were shaking. The email was still open on my laptop screen, the words blurring, then sharpening into focus again, each one a tiny hammer blow against my heart. He had moved his mistress into our vacation home. He didn't just cheat. He had replaced me in the physical space that held our most cherished memories. The audacity, the sheer nerve of it, was staggering. It went beyond infidelity. It was an act of profound emotional violence. It felt like he was trying to erase me from our own history, rewrite our story with her in my place. The house, once a beacon of our love, had become a symbol of his betrayal. And I was sitting miles away, helpless, blindsided, the ground giving way beneath my feet. The silence of my apartment was no longer just silence. It was the sound of my life falling apart. Every object around me, once a comforting part of my routine, now felt alien, disconnected from the person I thought I was, the life I thought I had. The air felt thin, hard to breathe. My thoughts were a jumbled mess of questions, accusations, and a deep, gut-wrenching pain that felt like a physical wound. How long? How could I have been so blind? How could he do this? Not just the cheating, but this. In our house. The house we built dreams in. The house that represented everything good and true about us. He had defiled it. He had taken the one place I felt truly safe and filled it with his lies. The image of them on the porch, bathed in the golden light of sunset, was burned into my mind. It was a perverse, twisted version of the life I had always envisioned for us. They were living my dream, in my place, built on my sacrifices and our shared history. The injustice of it was a bitter taste in my mouth. It wasn't just anger I felt, it was a profound sense of violation. It felt like he had broken into the most private, most sacred room of my heart and left his mess there. The house was an extension of myself, of us, and he had invited a stranger in to dance on the ruins of what we had built. The thought of her sleeping in our bed, cooking in our kitchen, walking on our beach, sent shivers of revulsion down my spine. It was a desecration. He hadn't just cheated on me. He had cheated on our history, on our future, on the very foundation of our life together. The house was the physical manifestation of our bond, and he had shattered that bond within its very walls. The silence was heavy with unspoken pain, with the weight of a million questions I didn't want the answers to. My hands still trembled, clutching the phone. The world outside continued on, oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred within the four walls of my apartment. Cars drove by. People walked their dogs. The city hummed with its usual rhythm. But my world had stopped. It had imploded. And the epicenter was a little house by the sea, a place that was supposed to be our sanctuary, now occupied by a stranger and the man who had promised me forever. The irony was a cruel, sharp blade twisting in my gut. Forever. It seemed like a naive, childish concept now. Forever was a lie, a story I had told myself to feel safe. The truth was much harsher, much colder. Forever was a fleeting moment, easily disposable, replaced by the next convenient lie. He had discarded our forever, tossed it aside like yesterday's newspaper, and set up house with his new, shiny version of a future. In our house. The sheer arrogance of it was breathtaking. It was like he believed he was untouchable, that he could simply erase the past and build anew on the very ground we had consecrated with our love. The rage began to burn hotter, a purifying fire against the cold numbness. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. This was about ownership, about disrespect, about the blatant, casual cruelty of stealing a dream and living it with someone else. In my house, on my watch. But he didn't know me as well as he thought. He saw the wife who loved the beach house, who poured her heart into it. He didn't see the woman who had meticulously managed every aspect of our finances, who had a memory for details he considered insignificant. He saw the emotional connection, the sentimental attachment. He didn't see the pragmatic layer, the careful planning that underpinned everything. And that oversight, that crucial blind spot, was about to be his undoing. The cold began to recede entirely, replaced by a different kind of chill, the kind that settles deep in your bones when you make a decision, a hard, irreversible decision. This wasn't just about getting him back. This was about reclaiming what was mine. Reclaiming the house, yes, but more importantly, reclaiming my sense of self, my dignity, the future he had tried to steal. The picture of them on the porch, once a symbol of his betrayal, began to morph in my mind. It became a target, a point of focus, a reason. He thought he was building a new life on the sand. He didn't realize the sand wasn't his to build on. Not anymore. The initial attempts to confront him were messy, undignified, fueled by shock and a desperate need for answers. I called him, my voice trembling, the accusation raw and ugly. He denied it, of course. Pathetic, half-hearted denials that crumbled under the weight of the few details Sarah had given me. He stammered, he blustered, he tried to turn it back on me, question my sources, my sanity. It was textbook gaslighting, a cruel performance that twisted the knife deeper. He called Sarah a liar, jealous, mistaken. He painted a picture of himself, alone at the house, needing space, needing to think. The gall was astonishing. He wanted me to doubt what I knew was true, to question the clear evidence of his deceit. It felt like he was trying to convince me that the sky was green, that water wasn't wet. The sheer effort he put into the lie was almost more hurtful than the lie itself. It showed a profound lack of respect, an assumption that I was easily fooled. It made me feel foolish, naive, forever believing him. My voice cracked. Sarah saw you, John. On the porch. With a woman. His paws stretched thick with guilt. I was just... She's a colleague. We were working. Working? On the porch? At sunset. My voice rose, thin and reedy. Don't lie to me, John.
Not now.
Not about this. I'm not lying. It's not what you think, he insisted, his tone shifting from blustering to a low, urgent plea. I can explain. Explain what? Explain why you're living in our house with another woman. The words were out before I could stop them, sharp little missiles aimed straight at his deceitful heart. His explanations were just more lies, flimsy excuses built on a foundation of sand. He said she was a client he was meeting, that she was just there for an hour, that Sarah must have seen things wrong. It was laughable if it wasn't so painful. He didn't even try to be creative. It was the kind of lie you tell a child. He clearly thought I was that child. The pain was a physical ache, settling in my chest. The betrayal wasn't just in the act. It was in the casual way he dismissed my feelings, my knowledge, my pain. It was in the assumption that he could lie his way out of this, that I would accept his pathetic excuses and move on. He underestimated me. Severely. The confrontations went nowhere. He refused to admit the truth, refused to leave the house. He spoke about needing space, about figuring things out. Meanwhile, he was clearly living a double life, dividing his time between our city apartment, when he deigned to show up, and the beach house, where he was building a new life with her. The injustice of it festered. He was using the place that represented our shared future as his love nest. He had stolen our sanctuary and turned it into a monument to his betrayal. My early struggles were characterized by this emotional paralysis, this inability to reconcile the man I thought I knew with the man who was lying so effortlessly, so cruelly. I felt adrift, lost in a sea of confusion and pain. The house, once my safe harbor, was now the eye of the storm. The city apartment became a cage. Every object reminded me of him, of US, of the life that was a lie. His side of the closet, his books on the shelf, the worn spot on the sofa where he always sat. They were ghosts, haunting my waking hours, mocking the illusion of normalcy I was trying to maintain. Sleep offered no escape. My nights were filled with vivid, painful dreams, replays of happy memories in the beach house, twisted and distorted by the knowledge of his betrayal. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, the silence of the apartment amplifying the roaring in my ears. The silence where his breathing should have been. The silence where his laughter should have been. The silence where our shared life used to hum. The weight of it all was crushing. I couldn't eat, couldn't focus. Work was a blur. I'd stare at my computer screen, the words swimming, my mind replaying the conversation with Sarah, the hollow sound of his voice lying to me, the image of her on my porch. Friends tried to reach out, but I pushed them away. Shame was a heavy blanket, suffocating me. How could I admit that my perfect marriage was a sham? That the man I adored had betrayed me in the cruelest way possible, in the place I loved most? I withdrew into myself, a wounded animal licking its wounds in solitude. The world outside felt distant, irrelevant. All that mattered was the gnawing pain in my gut, the constant replay of his deceit, and the burning image of them in my house. One sleepless night, pacing the apartment like a caged animal, my gaze fell on a stack of old documents in the corner of the living room, waiting to be filed. Property records, tax documents, old investment statements. Things I had meticulously organized for years, while he handled the bigger picture investments. It was a division of labor that had always worked for us. He was the visionary, the one who built our portfolio. I was the keeper of the details, the one who made sure the bills were paid, the paperwork was in order. It seemed mundane at the time, just the grunt work of managing a household. Now, staring at the piles of paper, a faint memory surfaced. The beach house. It wasn't a straightforward purchase. The house itself was on leased land. A long-term land lease. We had bought the house from a family who had owned it for generations, but the land beneath it belonged to the Oakhaven Historical Trust, a quirky local entity dedicated to preserving the town's character. The lease was for 99 years, paid up front in one lump sum by the previous owners, but transferred to us upon purchase of the house. It was a detail I'd handled, a thick packet of legal documents I'd reviewed and signed. He'd been busy with the investment side, securing the mortgage for the structure. I handled the land lease transfer. It seemed like a minor detail at the time, just another piece of paperwork in the complex process of buying property. A technicality. Until now. My hands trembled as I sifted through the documents, the dry rustle of paper loud in the silent apartment. There. Buried deep within the stack, in a faded blue folder. The land lease agreement. My name was on it. And John's. Jointly. We both owned the lease. But wait. I remembered something else. Something about how the previous owners had set it up. A condition. A stipulation. My fingers flew through the pages, scanning the dense, legal jargon, my heart pounding in my chest. There it was. Page 7. Section 4B. A clause regarding termination of the lease in case of default? No. Something else. Something about ownership structure. It wasn't just a joint lease. It was structured as joint tenants with right of survivorship, with a specific clause regarding dissolution of the ownership structure in case of marital separation or divorce. And that clause, the one we'd barely glanced at, the one the lawyer had quickly summarized as standard stuff, had a specific requirement. If the lease ownership needed to be dissolved or transferred due to marital breakdown, it stipulated that the lease interest would transfer solely to the party designated as the primary resident or, failing that, the party who had managed the initial transfer and ongoing legal compliance. And guess who had been designated the primary resident on the initial paperwork, needing a local address for the trust's records? Me. And guess who had managed the transfer and all subsequent interactions with the trust? Me. John hadn't wanted to deal with the local bureaucracy, as he'd called it. He'd left it all to me. Every form, every signature, every communication with the Oakhaven Historical Trust, it had all gone through me. My breath hitched. He owned the house, the structure, but he didn't own the ground it sat on. We jointly owned the lease on the ground. And under specific circumstances, like, say, a marriage dissolving due to his infidelity and abandonment of our shared primary residence, the city apartment, in favor of the secondary one, the beach house, occupied with a third party. My claim to that lease interest, under the terms he'd ignored, was exponentially stronger.
Potenziali, sole lei mine.
The thought struck me with the force of a physical blow, not of pain, but of sudden, blinding clarity. He had the house, but I held the ground. And without the ground, the house was worthless. It couldn't stay there. It wasn't anchored. It was like a boat without water. A building without a foundation. A sudden, sharp, cold resolve settled over me, pushing out the confusion and pain. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about leverage, about power, about reclaiming what was rightfully mine, not just the property, but my agency, my control over my own life. He had thought he could just move on, take what he wanted, discard me and our shared history like trash. He had been so focused on the house, the physical symbol of his new life, that he had completely forgotten the crucial, invisible layer beneath it. The land, the lease, the detail I had managed, the paperwork he had dismissed as insignificant. He had built his new world on borrowed land I had the power to reclaim. The shift was tectonic. I was no longer the heartbroken, helpless wife, trapped in the ruins of her marriage. I was the woman who held the deed to the ground his new life stood on. And I could pull that ground out from under him any time I chose. The pain hadn't vanished, but it had transformed. It was no longer a debilitating wound. It was fuel. Cold, clear, burning fuel. The weeping stopped. The paralysis lifted. A fierce, protective energy surged through me. The beach house wasn't just a house anymore. It was a battleground. And I knew exactly how to win. The days that followed were a blur of quiet, determined action. The helplessness was gone, replaced by a laser focus. I stopped calling him, stopped arguing. I went silent. This silence was not surrender, it was strategy. It was the silence of a predator stalking its prey. He probably interpreted it as despair, withdrawal, me giving up. Let him feel safe. Let him settle into his stolen life in my house. The longer he stayed, the more evidence I gathered. I meticulously documented everything. Dates he wasn't home. Records of his credit card usage showing purchases in Oakhaven when he was supposedly working late in the city. Casual mentions from mutual acquaintances who had seen John down at the beach house recently. And photos. Discreet, heartbreaking photos Sarah managed to take from a distance. Him and her, on the porch, walking the beach. The same beach I had walked with him 1,000 times. Each photo was a stab to the heart, but I compartmentalized the pain. It was no longer just emotional agony. It was Exhibit A, proof of cohabitation. Proof of abandonment of the marital residence. Crucial pieces in the legal puzzle I was assembling. Then, the phone call. A mutual friend, hesitant, apologetic.
Hey.
Heard you and John are taking some space. Something like that, I replied, keeping my voice neutral, calm. The emotional control was new, hard won.
Yeah, well.
Listen, saw him the other day.
He was asking about you.
Said he was worried. A pause, then lowered voice. He was with that woman again. At the beach house. Said they were thinking about making it more permanent. Making it more permanent. The casual cruelty of it almost made me drop the phone. They were planning their future in my house, on my land, while he was still legally married to me, while he was supposedly worried about me. The audacity was breathtaking. It ignited a fresh wave of icy fury, but I held it in check. This wasn't the time for emotional outbursts. It was time for precision. The mention of making it more permanent wasn't just salt in the wound. It was a dangerous escalation. It meant they were digging in. It meant they felt secure. And that security was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of the situation. His deepening crisis wasn't my crisis. It was his impending one. He was building a sandcastle, oblivious to the tide I was bringing in. The more comfortable they got, the higher the stakes rose, and the harder their eventual fall would be. This was no longer just about betrayal and heartbreak. It was about proving a point. That you don't build your happiness on the ruins of someone else's life, especially not on the ground she owns. I scheduled a consultation with a lawyer specializing in property law, specifically land lease agreements and marital assets. I didn't use our usual family lawyer. That would be too risky. This had to be handled discreetly, silently. I chose a firm on the other side of the city, known for their meticulous approach and discretion. Sitting in the lawyer's office, surrounded by leather-bound books and hushed tones, I laid out the situation. The marriage, the infidelity, his occupation of the beach house with his mistress, the unique land lease arrangement, my role in managing it, the specific clauses I had found. I watched the lawyer's face as I spoke, her initial professional calm giving way to intrigued attention, then a widening of the eyes as I explained the nuances of the lease agreement, particularly the dissolution clause. "So," she said, leaning forward, tapping a pen against her notepad. "He owns the structure. You jointly own the 99-year lease on the land. And the lease agreement contains a clause that, in the event of marital separation or divorce, gives preferential rights to the party designated as primary resident and manager of the lease obligations." "Yes," I confirmed, my voice steady. "And that's me, on the original paperwork and in practice." He left all the interactions with the historical trust to me. "And he is currently occupying the property with a third party, effectively abandoning the marital residence."
Yes.
"He's been staying there, semi-permanently, for weeks now. With her." The lawyer nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on her face. "This is unusual. Most land leases don't have such specific clauses regarding marital dissolution. It seems the previous owners were quite particular." "They were," I said, a faint, grim smile touching my lips. "They loved that house. They wanted to ensure its stewardship." She looked at me, a new respect in her eyes. "And you found this clause yourself?" "I did. When I was going through our papers." "Meticulous," she murmured, making a note. "That works in our favor." She explained the legal complexities. While he owned the house, the structure was legally tied to the land lease. The lease dictated the terms of occupancy. If the lease was no longer jointly held, or if his right to occupy under the lease was terminated, he would be in a precarious position. He couldn't legally occupy the land, even if his house was sitting on it. It was like having a beautifully built boat but no right to sail it, or even keep it in the water. The clause regarding marital dissolution and preferential rights was key. We could argue, strongly, that his actions had triggered this clause, effectively transferring his interest in the lease solely to me, or at the very least, severely diminishing his right to occupy the land under the joint lease terms, given his abandonment of the marital home and cohabitation with another person on the leased property. The most potent weapon? An eviction notice. "An eviction?" I asked, slightly surprised. "Exactly," she said. "A land lease functions much like a rental agreement, but on a much longer term. There are terms and conditions. One of those conditions is typically who is permitted to reside on the land. If his right to be on the land is terminated or contested, he is essentially trespassing. And since he doesn't own the land itself, merely the leasehold interest which is now in dispute, we can initiate eviction proceedings. Against him. And her. Against anyone occupying the land without legal right," the lawyer confirmed, her voice calm but firm. "Given the circumstances, the infidelity, the abandonment, the cohabitation in the beach house, we have a very strong case that his actions have violated the spirit, if not the letter, of the joint lease agreement, triggering the dissolution clause and strengthening your claim to sole leasehold interest. We can argue he no longer has a legal right to occupy the land. Therefore, he and anyone residing with him can be legally removed." The implications were enormous. He thought he had the house, the upper hand, the ability to dictate terms. He thought he could wait me out, negotiate a favorable settlement later, perhaps even keep the beach house as part of the divorce. He had factored in the value of the structure, the location, the memories. He hadn't factored in the ground beneath his feet. The ground I controlled. This wasn't just about money or property division. It was about power. He had tried to strip me of mine through deceit and disrespect. Now, I would reclaim it through meticulous planning and legal leverage. The rising challenges weren't about if I could do this, but how to execute it perfectly. Gather undeniable proof. Navigate the legal system. Keep it all secret until the moment of maximum impact. It was a delicate dance, a high-stakes game of chess where the board was my life and the pieces were pain, betrayal, and the cold, hard facts of property law. Each step felt heavy, fraught with risk. The fear of him finding out, of him somehow countering, was a constant hum of anxiety beneath my newfound resolve. But the alternative, letting him get away with it, letting them live happily ever after in my house, was unbearable. The house wasn't just a structure, it was the repository of my past, the symbol of my stolen future. I couldn't let him keep it. Not like this. The rising challenges were a series of increasingly complex legal and emotional hurdles. Obtaining sworn affidavits from Sarah and others who had seen them at the house. Working with the lawyer to draft the eviction notice, making sure every word was legally sound and devastatingly effective. Preparing for his inevitable reaction, the anger, the disbelief, the legal maneuvering he would attempt. It felt like preparing for war. And in a way, it was a war for my dignity, my future, and the ground beneath my feet. The plan solidified, piece by agonizing piece. My lawyer, Sarah, and I worked in concert, moving in the shadows. Sarah provided more documentation, casual texts from mutual friends mentioning seeing them, photos she had continued to take, timestamps verifying their presence. I compiled financial records showing John's decreasing contributions to our joint accounts, offset by increases in spending on things clearly related to Oakhaven, contractors, furniture, things that weren't for our life, but his new one. We built an airtight case, a chronological narrative of his abandonment and cohabitation, all centered around the beach house. The core of the strategy was the land lease. My lawyer was confident. The dissolution clause, combined with the evidence of his actions, gave us a powerful claim. We wouldn't just be arguing for my primary right to the lease. We would be arguing that his actions constituted a fundamental violation of the terms of the joint leasehold, effectively terminating his right to occupy the land at all, divorce proceedings notwithstanding. The eviction notice wasn't just a formality, it was the declaration of war. The turning point came the day the eviction notice was ready. A thick packet of legal documents, stark and official, sitting on my lawyer's desk. The language was dry, impersonal, outlining the facts, the property address, the names of the occupants, John Doe and unknown parties, the basis for the eviction, violation of land lease terms, including but not limited to unauthorized occupancy and abandonment of primary residence, and the deadline, 30 days to vacate the premises. 30 days. It felt both impossibly short and agonizingly long. This was it. No more planning. No more gathering evidence. This was the moment of truth. Signing the papers felt heavy, final. It was the culmination of weeks of pain, fear, and quiet determination. There was no going back. I was committing to this path, a path that would undoubtedly lead to confrontation, to ugliness, to the final, definitive end of my marriage. But it was also the path to reclaiming my life, my dignity, my home. The trembling returned, but this time it wasn't from fear or grief. It was from a potent mix of anxiety and exhilarating resolve. I was taking my power back. I was no longer reacting, I was acting. I was no longer a victim, I was a force. The decision felt cold, clinical, but beneath it raged a fire, fueled by every tear I had shed, every sleepless night I had endured, every lie he had told. He thought he could walk away, build a new life on my foundation. He was about to learn that foundations matter, that details matter, that I mattered, and I was done being silent. I was done being invisible. The eviction notice was my voice, finally speaking the truth, loud and clear. It was a legal document, yes, but it felt like a declaration of independence. A final, decisive step towards a future he wouldn't be in. A future I would build myself on solid ground. My ground. The serving of the eviction notice was orchestrated for maximum impact, minimum warning. We chose a weekday afternoon, knowing John would likely be there with her, settled into their routine. My lawyer arranged for a process server, a man whose job was to deliver legal documents with impartial efficiency. I debated whether to be there. My lawyer advised against it, fearing a scene, an emotional outburst that could complicate things. But I needed to be there. Not to gloat, not to confront him directly, but to witness it. To see their faces. To feel the shift in power. To close this chapter with my own eyes. I drove to Oak Haven alone, parking down the street, out of sight but close enough to see the house, to see the porch. The same porch from Sarah's email, now a stage for their final performance. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the unnatural calm I projected. I watched the process server walk up the driveway, a crisp white envelope in his hand. He knocked. The door opened. I saw her first, laughing, her hair damp from the shower perhaps, wearing one of his shirts. She took the envelope, a puzzled look on her face. John appeared behind her, asking who it was. I couldn't hear their words, but I saw the moment she opened it. Saw her face drain of color. Saw her hand tremble as she handed it to him. John took the envelope, a frown creasing his brow. He read the first few lines, his posture stiffening. Then he read the rest, his eyes scanning the legal jargon, searching for an escape, a loophole. His face went from puzzled to annoyed, to disbelieving, and finally, to a look of utter, gut-wrenching shock. The kind of shock that hollows you out, steals your breath. He looked up from the papers, his gaze sweeping the street, as if expecting to see me standing there, orchestrating it all with a dramatic flourish. I stayed hidden, a silent observer. The mistress was talking, her voice rising, pointing at the paper, looking frantic. John wasn't listening. He was staring at the envelope, at the return address of my lawyer's firm, at the mention of the Oak Haven Historical Trust. He was putting the pieces together, realizing what this meant. The land lease. The detail he had ignored, the paperwork he had dismissed. The ground beneath his feet. My ground. The air crackled with their silent, escalating panic. He looked like he'd been physically punched, the air knocked out of him. The mistress was demanding answers, her earlier laughter gone, replaced by a shrill, anxious tone. He finally spoke, his voice low, disbelieving. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw his expression, the dawning horror as he articulated the reality of the situation to her. They didn't just have to leave the house, they had to leave the land. And without the land, the house was effectively useless to them here. The climax wasn't a shouting match or a dramatic confrontation. It was this quiet, devastating moment of realization. It was the process server standing there, a neutral messenger of consequence, and John's world imploding before my eyes. The house, his sanctuary, their love nest, was built on ground he didn't control. And I was taking that ground back. His face, usually so composed, so confident, was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock and fear. He looked trapped, blindsided. The mistress was now crying, her hands flying to her mouth. This wasn't the romantic getaway she'd signed up for. This was a nightmare, served cold, on expensive legal paper. He tried to argue with the process server, who simply pointed to the documents, stated he was just delivering them, and politely excused himself. John crumpled the papers slightly, looking from the house to the street, back to the papers. He understood. He understood the implications. He owned the structure, but I owned the right to the land it occupied. And I was revoking that right. The sheer magnitude of the oversight, of the detail he had dismissed, must have hit him like a ton of bricks. He had been so focused on the grand gesture, taking the house, setting up a new life, that he had completely missed the critical fine print, the unassuming paperwork I had handled years ago. His arrogance, his assumption that the details didn't matter, had cost him everything. The house wasn't just a symbol of his infidelity, it was now a monument to his foolishness. A wave of something complex washed over me. Not pure triumph, not simple revenge. It was colder, more nuanced. It was the quiet satisfaction of seeing justice served, not by fate or karma, but by meticulous planning and owning the damn details. It was the vindication of knowing that my careful management, the part of our life he had deemed less important, was the very thing that had saved me. It was also tinged with a deep sadness for the life we could have had, the dream house that was now forever tainted. The silence in my car felt heavy, the air thick with the unspoken drama I had just witnessed. I didn't feel elation. I felt
Release.
a burden lifted. The fight wasn't over. Not entirely, but the decisive blow had been struck. He had moved his mistress into our vacation home, into my sanctuary, thinking he held all the cards. He forgot I owned the land lease. He forgot that the ground beneath his feet was mine. And now, he was staring at the consequence of that oversight, the cold, hard truth of eviction. The house was his, maybe in theory, but the land was mine, and I wanted it back. The ground was shifting not just under the beach house, but under my entire life. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. My own ground. The aftermath was quiet, anticlimactic in its own way. The 30 days passed in a blur of legal back and forth, though his lawyer quickly realized the strength of my position regarding the land lease. The dissolution clause, my documented history as the primary contact for the trust, and the evidence of his abandonment and cohabitation, it was an unassailable combination. He couldn't contest the eviction of himself and his mistress from the land, even if he technically owned the structure on it. The legal fees alone to fight such a specific land lease clause would be astronomical, with little chance of success. He owned a house he couldn't occupy, a house sitting on ground he had no legal right to be on. The house became a liability, not an asset. He couldn't sell it while it was subject to an eviction from the land. He was trapped. The only way out was to remove the house, or negotiate with me. He tried to negotiate, of course. Through lawyers. Offers were made, counteroffers returned. He wanted me to buy the house from him at a discount, or for us to sell the whole package together and split the proceeds. I refused. My position was simple and unwavering. I was keeping the land lease, and they had to vacate the property entirely, structure and all, by the deadline. The house was his problem. Getting it off my land was also his problem. The silence on the other end of the legal negotiations was louder than any argument. He had nowhere to go. In the end, he had to move the house. It sounds absurd, like something out of a cartoon, but that's what happens when you own a building but not the ground it sits on. A company was hired. For days, there were cranes and flatbed trucks. The beach house lifted slowly, painstakingly, from its foundation, from my land. I didn't watch that. I couldn't. The thought of the house, the repository of so many memories, being ripped from the ground where it belonged, was too painful. It was a violent end to a violent chapter. He moved it inland, to a plot of land he owned elsewhere. A house without its view, without the sound of the waves, without the sand under its foundations. A house severed from its soul. And his mistress? She left. Left him, left the house, left Oakhaven. The dream they had built on stolen ground had crumbled, taking their relationship with it. The foundation matters. The day the house was finally gone, I drove to Oakhaven. The plot of land where the house had stood for decades was bare. Just sand and the old foundation stones. The view of the ocean was unobstructed, vast, and empty where the house used to be. It felt surreal. Like a phantom limb. The space where the house had been was a gaping wound in the landscape, a physical manifestation of the void left by the end of my marriage. But it was also clean. Empty.
Mine.
The sand was soft beneath my feet as I walked onto the empty lot. The wind blew off the ocean, carrying the scent of salt and possibility. The air felt lighter, clearer. The betrayal still ached, a dull throb beneath the surface, but the sharp, agonizing pain was gone. It was replaced by a quiet sense of peace, a profound relief. The fight was over. I had won. Not just the land, but myself. My future. The victory felt bittersweet. I had saved the land, saved my connection to Oakhaven, but the price had been high. The loss of my marriage, the destruction of a shared dream. The beach house was gone, but the land remained. A blank canvas. I sat on the sand, watching the waves, the familiar rhythm a soothing balm to my frayed nerves. The land was mine. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like my future to build. Alone. But not broken. Stronger, in fact, for having navigated the storm and reclaimed my ground. He had forgotten the details. He had underestimated the quiet woman who managed the paperwork. He had built his new life on land that was not his. And in the end, the ground always wins. It was a harsh lesson, learned through fire and pain, but one I would never forget. The land lease wasn't just a piece of paper. It was my anchor, my leverage, the quiet power I held that he never saw coming. He moved his mistress into our vacation home, thinking he was starting a new life. He didn't know he was standing on borrowed time, on borrowed land that was always waiting for me to reclaim it.
And I did.
If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.